our Torah portion is Tavo. It starts in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1. Now, for a lot of you that have been in this walk for a while, what do we normally hear taught about when we get to Tavo? Generally speaking, over the course of the years that I've been involved in this walk, the portion is always taught about the blessings and the curses. That's the main emphasis. But I'm going a little different route today. We're still going to cover some blessings and curses things, but I want you to know that there's a lot more to it than just blessings and curses. And the way we look at blessings and curses, that's a totally different ballgame. So it starts out in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1, and it shall be when thou art come into the land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it and dwellest therein. So it starts off, Ve'haya ki tavo. It shall be when you come in. What does that mean, when you come in? So the word tavo comes from the root word bo. It means to go, to come, to enter in. So it can mean to come or to go, depending on the context that it's used in. That being the case, I think we look at it a little deeper. It's more about a transition, going from one point to another. How many remember transition lenses when they came out? You know, they go from light to dark and dark to light. When they're called, and I just learned this recently, they are called photochromatic lenses. They were developed in the 1960s. Do you know when they came into commercial use? Does anybody know when transition lenses first came out? They began being mass-produced in 1991. I thought they're a lot older than that. You know, I can remember people getting transition lenses and, oh, wow, those are so cool. But they actually didn't start until 1991 when they were being mass-produced. And that's what I want us to see in this Torah portion, that the entire portion has to do with the transition. Transitioning from one place to another. Now, that could mean a different location. Some of you may know that my wife and I are in a transition ourselves. We just moved. So we transitioned from one place to another place. That's been very challenging, let's say. This morning, for example, I couldn't find my clothes. I knew where my socks and my underwear were at. I knew where my work clothes were, you know, the T-shirts and the jeans. But, nicer clothes, I couldn't find. I was scrambling around. Where's my dress shirt? Where's my dress pants? I even had trouble locating my dress shoes. Normally, I wear a T-shirt or tennis shoes or work boots. So I knew where those were at, but shoes, dressy shoes, not so much. So we're transitioning from point A to point B, and it can be a challenge. I've heard a lot of people express lately the idea that they feel like overall we're in a transition phase. I mean, a lot of people have spoke to me and said, you can feel it. There's something in the air that we're about to transition. Something's changing. Whether it be politically, we're in an election year, so there's going to be a change, right? There's all of that charge that's, a political charge in the air. Then there's a spiritual transition that feels like it's happening. I know a lot of people will, they're shaking their head, bearing witness that, yes, we do feel a spiritual transition. And that's what I want to talk about today, is that transition and how it's going to manifest. So, or how I think it should manifest. And hopefully you'll see this too. There's some things woven throughout this Torah portion that point us to a certain thing. And I'm going to see if you can catch it with me. So, I have to look at what few notes I do have. So Tavo, the Torah portion, is broken down into 3 different sections. You can break it up this way. The first section is in chapter 26, we're given the laws of the Bikurim, the first fruits, and the tithing commandments. And then over in chapter 27, we go through this ceremony of pronouncing blessings and curses from Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And then chapter 28, the famous Tochacha is what it is known as in Judaism. That means rebuke. But it's the whole chapter of the blessings and the curses are known as the Tochacha, and that will come back into play here in just a little while. I want you to know it's very interesting to me. So now I can get rid of some of this stuff. Not my glasses. We can't do without those. So when you enter in Tavo, what does it mean? Okay, so we're entering in where? To the land. So physically speaking, remember there's first the natural, then the spiritual, right? So we haven't physically entered the land, but some of our brethren have. Now, with that in mind, what does entering the land mean for us? So it's the land of what? Promise, right? It's a land of promise. It's like that place that we achieve victorious living. Remember when the children of Israel entered the land, they had to defeat their enemies and come to a place of peace. So for us, it's that victorious life. But let's take that, let's go a little deeper into that layer and think about what else could that mean. In my mind, it's similar to going back to the garden. We're going into that place where he's at. Remember, he's going to choose in the land a place to set his name. So as he does that, that's going to give us a place to go to have intimate encounter with him. Very similar to going back to the garden where he walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. All right? So, but for what purpose? What is that purpose of entering into the land? Same as it would be as going back to the garden. Why did God put Adam and Eve in the garden? So let's turn to Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, because he tells us exactly why he put Adam in the garden. It says, and Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. What does that mean? What does it mean to dress it and keep it? So if we look at the Hebrew words, and the reason I want to do this is because Adam was able to operate in his purpose being dress and keep the garden, right? So let's look at a little bit at the words. You guys know I am a very excitable person when it comes to Hebrew words. So the first word I want to look at is the word in Genesis 2:15 that says tend, where he's to tend the garden. It's the word avad, and it means to work, to serve, to work or perform a service to another out of obligation, requirement, or gratitude. In other words, stewardship. So God placed Adam in the garden to be a steward over the garden. What else did he do? He sent him in the garden to keep it. We hear that word a lot, keep, shamar. We're supposed to keep the commandments, right? But what does that word mean? In Hebrew, it has a lot more depth of meaning than we think of it just keep. When we think of keeping the commandments, we think of doing a list of do's and don'ts. We do this thing and we don't do that thing, and we're keeping the commandments. Well, there's more depth to it, because the word shamar in Hebrew, from which we get keep, it does mean to keep. It means to guard. It means to observe. It means to watch over as one would watch over and protect a precious treasure. So God's asking us to keep the garden. If the garden is that place where he dwells, what are we keeping it from? We're keeping it from the things that would come in that would pollute it, where it would be a place that he could not come and commune with us. Adam did not keep the garden, right? He let the serpent in, and the serpent deceived Eve, and she gave to Adam, and he took and ate. It doesn't say that Adam was deceived. Adam, he failed. And because he failed to keep, to guard and to keep, to tend, to avad or avado, service, doing that service and keeping the garden, protecting it, he was expelled from the garden. So our whole life's purpose is to get back to the garden, where we can guard, where we can tend and keep the garden and have a place to commune with God. Okay, for some reason I keep hitting enter and it does something else. So in this idea of going back to the garden, we're to tend and to keep. Remember I said that avad has the idea of stewardship. So that brought to my mind a passage in Matthew chapter 25. Yeshua said the kingdom of God is likened unto a man that goes on a journey. So let's read Matthew 25, starting in verse 14. Okay, I'm just going to read it from the board. It's easier. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods unto them. And the one he gave 5 talents, and to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them. What did he do? He did a service, right? He performed work. He was doing avodah. He was performing a service. So he traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise, he who received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. Does that seem to, where I'm kind of making a connection here? We're making an account. We're a steward, and now we're having to make account. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. And his Lord said unto him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered unto me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides these. And I'm going to interject this here. I really get frustrated with that English word talents. It is a measure of money. It's a weight. So, but I see so many people look at it as something different. Oh, I'm talented in this. I can sing, or I can dance, or I can, whatever, bake good cookies. Anybody that can bake good cookies, see me after. But that word means a sum of money. And I think it a lot of times gets misconstrued into thinking it's these talents, these abilities that the Father has given us, when it's not that. He's giving us a physical, tangible something that we can turn around. Now, there can be application for that, don't get me wrong, because, what things he gives you can be turned around to magnify him. But at the same time, in the context we're talking about, he's giving us something physical to reproduce. And that's going to come into effect here in a few minutes when we get back to Tavo. So his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. Who wants to hear that? So you have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he who had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. I'm very confused by this man. He did not have any care for his master. The word avad, which we get service, tend the garden, has another related word. It's an eved. Does anybody know what an eved is? It's a bondservant. He's the one who said, I love my master. I love my wife and my children that my master has given me. I don't want to leave the master's house. This bondservant that took and hid the talent in the ground, was he really a bondservant? Because he didn't love his master. He saw his master as a hard man, a man that didn't, have any real gains that he had worked for, that he had done. So he had a different perception of the Father. Was he a real bondservant? Something that might be very indicative of that was his ear bored through with an awl. Because had his ear been bored through, he would hear differently, right? He would be able to shema the words of the king. Where did we get to? But the Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So he called him a wicked and lazy servant. Therefore, take the talent from him and give it to him who has 2 talents. So how does all that come into play here? It's about an accounting. Well, when we start looking at the passage in Deuteronomy 26 of Tavo, what's the first thing we run into? Verse 2 says, thou shalt take of the fruit, or the first of all the fruit of the earth, which you shall bring of thy land, that the Lord thy God giveth thee. Okay, so we're going to bring the first fruits. But there's an accounting of that first fruit. So when you go out into your field in the spring, when things first start coming up, you're going to mark a certain portion of it as the first fruits. And those first fruits are what you're going to bring to the Lord. You're going to present them to him as an offering. Now, we know the Feast of First Fruits, right? We've heard that we call it the Feast of First Fruits. But it is the Bikurim, the offering of the first fruits. When does this happen? It happens generally it starts happening around Pesach, right? When we bring the first fruits of the barley harvest. But did you know that Bikurim can be brought all the way up until really right after Sukkot? Because there are certain things that are not going to be ready in the early spring. Your fruits and vegetables, those first fruits are not ready yet. So it's a long process that you can bring Bikurim. But we're commanded to bring a representative portion. Typically that was done by the priests. There was a certain field that they kept in Jerusalem that we had barley that we marked off, and then we brought that as the Bikurim for the nation. All right, but individually, we all still bring Bikurim on our own. So we bring our own first fruits. I seem to remember a passage where it says something about those that rose when Yeshua rose, that they were his first fruits. So he brought his first fruits. Hope I don't get the production guys all mixed up because I'm jumping around. Okay, so when we go to the Bikurim, we have this elaborate, I say elaborate, there's a liturgy that we pronounce. I know a lot of times with us, liturgy is a bad word. We don't like liturgy because it's dry and we're free spirits, right? But you think about this entire Torah portion can be looked at as a renewal of the wedding vows. We'll get more into that in a few minutes, but that wedding that took place, that bonding of the nation of Israel to the God of Israel that happened on Sinai, this is like a renewal because this is going to happen when they enter the land. That's the second generation because remember, the first generation died out before they were able to enter the land. So we're to take our first fruit of the earth, bring it in a basket, place it before the Lord, or to the place where the Lord chooses to put his name. We're going to give it to the priest, and we shall go to the priest, and that shall be in those days, and say unto him. We're going to say these words, and I want to see if anybody here recognizes some key elements that might tie us back to a different passage, a different story. You profess this day unto the Lord thy God that I have come into the country which the Lord swore unto our fathers for to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thy hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God. And thou shalt speak and say. So we've got some words that he's going to say, like wedding vows. How many people go into a wedding and just spout off whatever pops off the top of their head? They usually have a set, written down, prescribed set of vows that they are making. So we're going to say these particular words. In verse 5, it says, "Now speak and say the Lord thy God." Okay, let me switch. I got to do something really quick because this is the one passage that I have trouble with in King James because we've used it so much out of the New American Standard at a place I was at before. So it says, sorry. You shall answer and say before the Lord thy God, my father was a wandering Aramean, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number. But there he became a great, mighty, and populous nation. And the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us and imposed hard labor on us. Then we cried unto the Lord our God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction and our toil and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and with great terrors and with signs and wonders. And he brought us unto this place, and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought you the first of the produce of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me. And you shall set it down before the Lord your God and worship before the Lord your God. So we'll have to go down a little further when we look at the liturgy of the tithe to point back to this story. But did you notice some things? My father wasn't a wandering Aramean. Why are we reciting this stuff to God? He already knows, right? He knows that our father Jacob was a wandering Aramean. He knows that the Egyptians afflicted hard bondage on us, and that he heard our cry, and that he delivered us with a mighty and outstretched arm, and he's brought us into this land that's flowing with milk. Why are we repeating these words to him? I submit to you that we're repeating them for us. We are acknowledging that this is who we are. This is where we came from. This is where you have brought us into and blessed us. And that we are acknowledging that fact, that you are in fact our God. Now, when we bring the tithe, we keep going on down here. In verse 12, it says, when you have finished paying your tithe, and you have given or the tithe of your increase in the third year, the year of tithing, then you shall give it to the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, the widow, that they may eat in your gates and towns and be satisfied. So we're bringing our tithe at the third year. We've given it to the Levite, the stranger, the widow, and the orphan, so that they would have something to eat. But then we have these other words to say. You shall say before the Lord your God, I've removed the sacred portion from my house, and also have given it to the Levite, the alien, the orphan, and the widow, according to all of your commandments which you have commanded me. Think about saying this part. I have not transgressed or forgotten any of your commandments. I have not eaten of it while mourning, nor have I removed any of it while I was unclean, nor offered any of it to the dead. I have listened to the voice of the Lord my God, and I have done according to all that you have commanded me. That's a pretty big expectation that we're going to have to say, I've kept all of your commandments. Have we? Have we striven to keep all those commandments? Then we continue, look down upon from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people, Israel, and the ground which you have given us, the land flowing with milk and honey, as you swore to our fathers. And then we go on, it says, the Lord commands you to do these statutes and ordinances, and you're careful to do them with all your heart and your soul. Does anybody come up with an idea? Does it bring back a story to mind of why would we be doing this tithe now? Let's go back to Genesis chapter 28. If you remember the story, Jacob has left his father's house because let's just say he tricked him into giving him the blessing, and Esau wanted to kill him. So he was sent to Laban's house to get a bride. And so Jacob arrives at Bethel, and he sleeps, sets up some stones, makes a pillow out of the stones, and then he sets them up as a pillar. Those are really funny because if you know me, I call the pillow a pillar. So that's a Appalachian thing, we'll say. Okay, so, and then Jacob goes to sleep. He has this dream, and he sees the angels of God ascending and descending the ladder, right? You remember the story. After that, it says in verse 20, and Jacob vowed a vow saying, if God be with me and keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again into my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give a tenth unto thee. So there's where we find the tithe. But was Jacob ever able to bring that tithe? Because he said, after these certain conditions, then I'll bring the tithe. You'll be my God then, and I'll bring the tithe. So there's a couple components. We look at it, we know that God was with Jacob. He gave him bread to eat and raiment to put on. What does the promise have to do with? God promised Abraham, what about his descendants? That they would be as the stars of heaven and the sand of the sea. And he promised him a land, a place that, every place that the sole of his foot touched would be his. Did Abraham realize that promise in his lifetime? No. His descendants were Isaac and Ishmael. At that point, he had been in the land, but he was still a sojourner in the land. Then we moved to Isaac. That same promise was passed to Isaac. Was Isaac ever able to fully realize that promise? Nope. Again, he wasn't able to realize the full promise because you think about it, he did settle in the land somewhat. But he didn't. The Philistines kept, he was digging wells and the Philistines would keep coming and stopping up his wells. So he never really settled the land. And his descendants, again, did not become as numerous as the stars of heaven or as the sand of the sea. But what about Jacob? We know Jacob did actually make it back to the land, and he stayed there for a while. He had quite a few descendants, 12 sons, a daughter. So he had a lot of descendants, but did he stay? No, he went down few in number, down into Egypt, and there is where he became a great and mighty and populous nation. And then he came back up. But he has not returned to his father's house, that piece of land, yet in peace. But now, as Tavo, we're going in to the land we are going to take possession of. You go back to the first verse of chapter 26. When you go into the land that the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, to what? To possess it and to live in it. So we're going to possess the land. So we, as this nation going into the land now, we're going to realize that promise. Therefore, because we're sons of Abraham, we're sons of Isaac, we're sons of Jacob, now we're obligated to fulfill that vow that Jacob made and bring the 10th. Okay, so that kind of gets us through the first section of this Torah portion. But I want to point out one thing. Let me find it. There is a word that is woven throughout this Torah portion completely that has really been an eye-opener for me. And it ties this whole section together. In verse 11, and this is after we've brought the first fruits. He says, and then you shall rejoice. Where'd it go? Oh, I went down too far. Then you shall rejoice in every good thing which the Lord thy God giveth unto thee and unto thy house, thou, the Levite, and the stranger that is among you. So we are going to rejoice together with the Levite, the stranger, and our house. So then we're going to move into chapter 27. No, before we go, let me go back. I don't want to too much. There is a very unusual word that I want to point out now, and we'll come back to it. In this chapter, there is a word that is only mentioned in the entire Tanakh 3 times. And all 3 appear in Tavo. It is a seemingly unusual word. It's a simple word, but it's only used 3 times. And it's the word for basket. So we're to bring our first fruits offering in a basket, right? Why not a box? Why not a gift bag? Why not in a wrapped present? Why? Well, chapter 27 is going to shed some light on that, I think. But we're given a word that's used first here in this section, and it is the Hebrew word teneh. It means a basket. So it is a tet, a nun, and an aleph. And it realistically means basket. But when you look and you break down the words into their pictures, the tet is the picture of a basket, and the nun is a picture of a seed. So the word really means a continuation of the basket, because the seed is what continues and propagates life down through the ages, right? So you plant seed, you scatter seed, and that seed continues. It goes to harvest, there's more seed produced. So there's a progression of continuance there. The same with the seed of man. You know, a man has a child, and that child has a child, and that child has a child, and the seed progresses, it continues. So that word teneh literally means, picture-wise, the continuation of the basket. The first fruits represent the continuation of the basket. All right, so next we move into chapter 27. And this is where we get the ceremony where half the tribes go to Mount Gerizim and half the tribes go to Mount Ebal. And there they pronounce the blessings and the curses, and all the people say, amen. So they acknowledge. We move further down in the chapter. After they've gone through, there's an unusual break. So the curses start. But when we go into the land, we're going to take stones and we're going to set these stones up. And we are going to plaster them with plaster. And we are going to write the Torah on those stones. Why would we do something like that? To me, it shows a transition. Here's why. When you come from, say, the state of Georgia to the state of Tennessee, what do you see? If you're on the road, what do you see? You see a sign, welcome to Tennessee. And then a little bit down the road, you're going to see another little sign, and it's going to say, seatbelts required, click it or ticket, right? And then you go on down the road just a little bit more, and there's another sign that says, hands-free devices only. Okay, for those that like to talk on their cell phone like this, you're not supposed to do that in the state of Tennessee. You're supposed to use hands-free. So those are signs that tell us something. What do they tell us? They tell us that the state we are now entering has a set of laws, has a set of regulations that may or may not have applied in the state you're leaving. It also means the people that live in that state abide by those laws, generally speaking. Because I see a lot of people on the road with their hand against the phone thing, and a lot of no seatbelts. But there is a change, and it's a signpost that says, okay, these laws are going to be applicable in this state. There's a difference when you transition from one point to another. The same as we transition in Tavo, the Tavo meaning to transition. So we have this going from point A, I'm passing from death unto life. Now, I'm not equating Georgia with death and Tennessee to life, but, take your own conclusions there. So we have these signposts that show that there is a transition in who and where the people that live there operate by a different law. They have a different God. And that was given at the entrance coming in to the land of Canaan, in the area of Shechem, the mountains of Gerizim and Ebal. So it was plain for everybody to see that those signs are where we have that transition. And the requirements now are maybe different than where you came from. Remember, Bill said lately a lot of times that things that used to be okay are not okay now. And things that are not okay, or were okay, may not be okay now, and we're not okay and may be okay now. So there's that transition. How can we tell we have transitioned? There is a key evidence that we have transitioned from death into life. Does anybody know what that verse is? You know you have passed from death into life when you have love for the brethren. So there's a change in character as well. You transition from this place of being self-absorbed into caring about others. Paul said, let's esteem others better than ourselves, right? So, that's King Jermey version. So I have thought for a long time, it says esteem others better than ourselves. How many of us have heard most of our lives that you need to have a little self-esteem? I think according to Scripture, you're supposed to have others' esteem. Esteem others better than yourself. Treat them better than you would yourself. I mean, how many of us are guilty of beating up on ourselves a lot? How many of us, really beat up on the other person a lot more? Whether it's talking behind their back or whatever. So we'll notice that the curses that are mentioned in chapter 27, they're all things that are done in secret. These different sexual sins that are listed, moving a neighbor's landmark. You don't do that in the open where somebody's going to see you do it. Making a molten image to serve it in a secret place. Having contempt for your father or mother. Those are all things that are done in secret. We're not to do that. We're to be open. But it seems like an odd, before we get to those curses, God gives us some instructions about not only, setting up these pillars. We're to obey his voice, keep his commandments, and do his judgments. We're going to stand on the mountains, half of them on one side, half on the other. Where'd my verse go? I didn't put it for you guys to give me, so there it is. In verse 5 says, and there you shall build an altar unto the Lord thy God, an altar of stones. Thou shalt not lift up any iron tool upon them. Thou shalt build the altar of the Lord thy God of whole stones, and thou shalt offer burnt offerings thereon unto the Lord thy God, and thou shalt offer peace offerings there, and what? Rejoice before the Lord your God. So we've been given instructions about an altar. This is the second time that we hear instructions from Moses about building an altar of stone. Now, the first time is in Exodus 20, chapter 20, verse 25. I'm pretty sure. And he gives us some details. Pretty sure it's 25. 24, verse 24. An altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shalt sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings, thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thine oxen, in all places where I record my name, and I will come unto thee and will bless thee. And if thou wilt make an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stone, for if thou liftest thy tool upon it, thou hast polluted it. So that brings so we know that an altar of stone where we offer two types of offerings. Whole burnt offerings, olot, or shlamim offerings. Those are the peace offerings. Those are offerings that can be offered on the stone altar. But he tells us that they're not to be hewn stone, right? If you put iron to it, it pollutes it. Now, I'm not going to go into different, explanations and thoughts of people of why no iron. But when we go back to Deuteronomy chapter 27, and we get a little more detailed instruction, and we kind of miss it because we don't read it in Hebrew. We don't see these words. How many of you heard it loses something in translation? Well, that happens a lot with Hebrew to English especially. English is such a language. So in verse 5 again, he said, this is Deuteronomy chapter 28, he said, thou shalt build an altar unto the Lord thy God, an altar of stones. Thou shalt not lift up any iron tool upon it. So we've already known, we're going to build an altar of stone, and we're not to lift any iron upon it. We're not going to cut them with iron tools. We've already been given that instruction. But then if we look in verse 6, he goes a little deeper. He says, and thou shalt build unto the altar of the Lord thy God of whole stones. Thou shalt offer burnt offerings thereon, and thou shalt offer peace offerings, and shalt eat there. So the word for whole stones in this case is shlemot. That's the word that's used for whole stones. And then we're going to offer peace offerings on the altar, right? Besides the alot, we're going to offer peace offerings. And those are shlemim. That's the word for peace offering. We heard that word before. Did you hear the connector, the root in that word? It's the root word shalem, where we get shalom. It means whole, complete, safe, peaceful, perfect, full, at peace. So there's a connection between this altar of stones and the offerings that we bring on it. But there's something else that he said. When we bring these offerings, what are we to do? Come on, surely somebody remembers. We rejoice. We're supposed to rejoice. Have we seen a common theme here yet? There's some rejoicing in all these sections. There's something going on about rejoicing. So, shlemim, whole burnt offering, and joy. I want us to turn to John chapter 4. This story is very familiar. It's the story of the woman at the well. Now, where does this story take place? John chapter 4. Yeshua's on his way through Samaria, right? And he stops. The King James says Sychar or Sychar. I'm not sure how they would pronounce it. I'm from the South, so we say Sychar. But John chapter 4, starting in verse 3. And he left Judea and departed again into the Galilee. And he must needs go through Samaria. Then he cometh to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar. Does anybody know what that city is? Shechem. Or for some of you southern people, Shechem. All right? It's realistically pronounced Shechem. Near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. There's a tie into Jacob. Now, Jacob's well was there. So that kind of gives us an idea. We're connecting back to Jacob, something to do with Jacob at this well. Yeshua, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. Then cometh, I keep jumping. I'm sorry. Then cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water, and Yeshua said unto her, give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away into the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Yeshua answered and said unto her, if thou knowest the gift of God, and who it is that saith unto thee, give me to drink, thou would have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman said unto him, sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou this living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the drink, or gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children and his cattle? Yeshua answered and said unto her, whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman saith unto him, sir, give me this water, that I may thirst not, neither come hither to draw. And Yeshua saith unto her, go call thy husband and come hither. And the woman answered and said unto him, I have no husband. You know the story. She doesn't have a husband, and he says, you've rightly said you have no husband, for you had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband. In that saidest thou truly. Then she shifted gears. Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worship. So now she's going to shift from this physical need to, oh, he's a prophet. I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to act all spiritual, right? How many times have we done that in conversations? She said, sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Yeshua said unto her, woman, believe me, the hour cometh when shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Ye worship what ye know not. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Then the woman said unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ, Messiah. When he is come, he will tell us all things. And Yeshua said unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. And upon this came his disciples, and marveled that he talked with the woman. Yet no man said, what seekest thou, or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot, and went into the city, and saith unto men, come see a man which told me all things ever I did. Is not this the Messiah? So my point here is, maybe I don't even know my point. We go back to Isaiah chapter 12, verse 3. Isaiah 12, 3. They don't have it. I can pull it. Isaiah 12, 3 says, therefore with joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. Okay? Therefore with what? With joy. Did you see how joyful this woman was when she went back into town? Can you see her skipping around, talking about, the Messiah? It's the Messiah. It's the Messiah. Come and see the man that tells me. She was excited. She was happy. She was joyful, right? Well, this is an interesting point. There is a couple different words for joy in Hebrew. Now, the typical word that we find for joy is simcha. We have an entire holiday devoted to it called Simchat Torah. It's the joy of the Torah, right? And simcha means to rejoice, to have joy, to be glad. So there we go, simcha. But there's also another word for joy, and it's the word, we sing this one at Sukkot as well. It's the word sason. Remember, Bill's very good at getting us all together every year. It's sason, with joy. But what does that word sason mean? It does mean gladness, joy, and exuberance, but it has the idea of short-lived joy. Like, a good example would be when your football team gets a goal in the final seconds of the game to win, and everybody goes, yes! That's the kind of idea that sason means. It's that burst of joy, but it's short-lived. Because once the goal's over, okay, we go on to the next step, right? Simcha, though, is different. Simcha's a kind of continual joy. It's been noted that a lot of Jewish sages connect simcha with vegetation in the idea that it's something that's long. It takes a long time. It continually grows. It's about growth. it has to do something with having a purpose. So a person that has simcha knows that they're operating in their purpose. Therefore, the other things that happen don't interrupt that simcha. It's not happiness as such. I heard it said a long time ago, happiness is about what happens to you. Joy, though, is down inside. And circumstances don't affect joy. So, with that in mind, let's go back to chapter 28. I promise it does tie together. It may not seem like it. It seems to me that I'm just jumping all over the place. But there is a connection here. Chapter 28. That is the chapter with all the blessings and the curses, right? Blessed are you if you do this. Blessed are you, or if you do that. Cursed are you if you do this. Cursed you are if you do that. So we look at it as the blessings and the curses. I'm going to submit to you that most of us, for most of our lives, have looked at it. Blessings are rewards and curses are punishments. I don't think it's the case. I think what really the blessings and the curses are it relates to the law of reaping and sowing. These are natural outgrowths, natural consequences that if you shema and you shamar, so you hear. Shema is more than just hearing a bunch of words, right? It's more than, it has the idea that I hear it, I take it in, I incorporate it into my life, and I make something out of it. It becomes a permanent part of me. So Shema, Shamar, we guard it. And then Asa, or even Avodah, are the words that have to do with making something and doing a service. It's us working within our purpose. So when we look at the blessings and the curses, let's go back to our basket. Remember I told you there was a word that was only used three times. It's in two places. It's the word tanah. It is related to the basket that we bring our bikurim in, right? Our first fruits. It's used again in chapter 28. Verse 4, I think it's 4. I have to scroll down a touch. You guys would be amazed how big my font has to be for me to see it. So, verse 5, blessed shall be thy basket and thy store. And then we scroll down a handful of verses later and we see curses shall be your basket and your store, your kneading trough. But that is the word tanah. So blessed you'll be if you keep these words, blessed you'll be, and cursed if you don't, in your basket, in your tanah. What does that tell you? Your first fruits, the thing that you bring your first fruits in, will not be blessed. It will not be as abundant if you don't listen and obey the words that he set out before us. There's another very interesting verse that tells us why. When we get through the curses, we start through the curses and we're halfway through with the curses and they get progressively worse. But it's just like not obeying his commandments. Things are going to get progressively worse for us. It's 47, right? He's going to tell us why these curses are coming upon us. In verse 47, he says, because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. And then he goes on to say, you'll become a sign and a wonder in thy seed forever. Here we go. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness of heart for the abundance of all things. And then he continues on with more curses. He explains to us why these curses come upon us. Because we don't have joyfulness of heart. We don't rejoice. Remember, that's a continuing, growing thing. To me, when I was trying to dissect this, why we're not rejoicing? What is that? How does that look? We do things. I think what he's trying to explain to us is that he doesn't want us to do things by rote. Do a routine. I'm doing this commandment because this is what I do. I don't not eat pork because, he said not to, and I'm afraid that I'll get punished. Or I keep Shabbat because if I don't, I'll get punished. He doesn't look at that. He's trying to get us to look deeper into ourselves and say, this is something to rejoice about. We're supposed to grow. Let's go back to the story of the woman at the well. Remember, she had that exuberant joy. Yeshua said that if you drink of this water, and I think he referred back to Isaiah 12, those the wells of salvation springing up. He said, if you ask of me, you'll draw waters, and I'll give you water, and it will be a well springing up in you. So that sazon, that exuberance, that yes kind of joy, it's going to keep bubbling up. It's going to keep bubbling up. And that's going to sustain you as you grow into simcha, to where you have the joy all the time. It's a constant, deep down joy. So, my next one is, I did that one. So then, to tie the joy stuff together, I want us to go to James, chapter 1. Verse 2 and 4, it says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Count it all joy. Now, in King James, I think it says when you fall into divers temptations, count it all joy. Why am I going to be joyful about falling into temptation? So the word for fallen, that Greek word happens to mean being surrounded by. But temptations, what is the word for temptation? Because a lot of times in English we have one word, but there could be different Greek words or Hebrew words that have this. It has a slightly different meaning, but we only have one word to describe it in English. This happens to be one of those. Temptations is the Greek word, if I can pronounce it correctly, perasmos. And it means an experiment, an attempt, a trial and proving. So let's read that verse again and use a different word. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various provings. Remember, I said earlier that chapter 28, the section with the verse, the blessings and the curses, is known as the tochacha. That's the rebuke. And that's what it's just classified or titled as, the tochacha. But tochacha can also mean approving. So what we're doing is we're being asked to prove ourselves. Count it all joy. There's joy again. That ties it back in to these various trials, these various proving times. What are we doing? And I had completely missed it. We go back to chapter 27 when we talk about the blessings spoken from Mount Gerizim and the curses spoken from Mount Ebal. Those twin mountains, what do they resemble? Let's talk about the city that's in the valley between them, Shechem. Does anybody know what that word means in Hebrew, Shechem? Shoulders. We have a choice and a decision to make. Think about how many of you remember the little cartoon where you've got the little devil on one side and you got the little angel on the other side whispering in your ear, trying to get you to make a decision right or wrong. Well, that's where we're at. We're in that valley in Shechem. That's where shoulders are at, where we have to make a decision. Are we going to follow the blessings? Or are we going to follow the curses? Are we going to do that with joy? So we're coming up on a season that we're all excited about, Sukkot. And we know it as the season of our joy. But it's not our sason. It's our simcha, the season of our simcha. So we want that joy not to be spontaneous and short-lived. We want it to be a joy that lives and dwells and continues on throughout all of our observance, because that shows the Father that we love him. We've made the decision to follow his word and not reap the consequences of the following or the not following. Hope that makes a little bit of sense. So again, I encourage you all to really dig deep, especially as we're coming into this season of our joy. Find our joy and maintain it. You know, that bubbling up, let's maintain it. And we do that by doing what? Shema, hearing, shamar, guarding, and our service, our avad, to do.